Galaceth Prismari is a really cool dragon that loves art, but not in the way that you'd expect from the creator of an art school. Or perhaps you do. If so, I hope you'll be okay. Galaceth Prismari once created the Prismari School on Strixhaven, which is on Arcavios. We will not go into details on the world or Strixhaven as a whole, but we will check out Prismari. Then I will show you cards that are great with Galaceth, which will also teach you about why instants and sorceries aren't really his strong suit. Spoiler alert, treasures really are. Or at least focusing on the sorceries and instants aren't his strong suits. This video is for everyone who wants to know more about their commander, that want to really get to know him, or who are interested in this small piece of flavor. When we zoom in to Prismari on Strixhaven, we first find the Snarls. These are manifestations of mana of two conflicting sources or colors of mana that come together and make a beautiful landscape. In the case of Prismari, this is the Frostboil Snarl. This land ends the battlefield. You may reveal an island or mountain card from your hand, and if you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. Mostly it will enter untapped, so it's a pretty strong land. Now what we see here is a combination of lava and ice that come together to make alternating sculptures of ice and solid stone that is really hot. And these sculptures take turns, but they also take these nice shapes of the movements of these geysers that spring up and these lava boiling sculptures that almost seem to puncture through these ice blocks, and that is exactly what Prismari based their art on. Now there's one thing to note, which is that mana usually influences all creatures around a world, but in this case these Snarls mostly influenced the dragons of this world, so they mostly influenced Galaceth, and Galaceth went on to create Prismari. The Prismari campus is a place that is sculptured after these raw energies of ice and fire. We can see that in the shapes of the stone here, but it has been set in stone way more than the usual things that we find in nature. This is a school. The Prismari are still pretty dangerous with their arts, but mostly the students are, and we see that many of the teachers have been limiting these students and have been trying to make them have perfect art, but that of course is not really possible. So they are slowly breaking out of that mold. The students themselves, as this flavor puts it, dance between the tension between passion and perfection. And that is what we see in the two colors as well. So red stands for the passion, very starting power of that lava that we saw before, and then there's the perfection of the ice that we are trying to mold into a perfect shape. And this dance is also a literal one. The Prismari students also like to perform art that is moving, that is short-lived, and that isn't always there, that can go away. It will be changed for something else, just as we see in the snow, exactly like that actually. All the Strixhaven schools teach us a lot about their teachings through their deans, and those of the Prismari are also dancing between perfection and passion. But in this case we see the Dean of Perfection, Uvilda, who is trying to teach the students to keep their art alive, and her mechanic says you may exile an instant or sorcery card from your hand and put 3 hone counters on it. So you put some art out and then you start honing it to perfection. It gains at the beginning of your upkeep. If this card is exiled, remove a hone counter from it, and when the last hone counter is removed from this card, if it's exiled you may cast it. It costs 4 less to cast this way. So in this manner you can pretty quickly cast the really high cost spells of Prismari in this set. So that is one way to perform your art. The other one is through expression and through Nassari's philosophy. They say at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of each opponent's library. Until end of turn you may cast spells from among those exiled cards, and you may spend mana as though if it were mana of any color to cast these spells. Then they also grow themselves and they become stronger. But the more important thing is that they don't stay with their art for very long. They take whatever they are inspired by from other people and they sort of express it. And in the story even, they stole art from a student basically, and they performed it really well after the student had performed their art though. So Nassari still leaves some space for them, but we can see that Nassari really just wants to have a little bit of fun with their art. So those are two ways of going about it in real life as well, I guess, but please don't be as extreme as these two. So something interesting, because Galazeth is all about treasures, or well, for a big part. So something interesting is to see which cards create treasures in the set that Strixhaven is in. So most of them do it in the same way. So these three cards that we see here are essentially the same. So Creative Outburst, Elemental Masterpiece and Magma Opus all have some big flashy effect for 7 or 8 mana that deals damage and creates 4/4 elemental tokens. But, and that would show that you are performing a big piece of art right now. This is your magnum opus basically, or your magma opus. This is your masterpiece, or this is an outburst of creativity that just had to go out right now. A sort of improvisation maybe even. But you can also say, I have this big idea but I don't want to do it right now, so I'll push this project to the side. And that is what happens in the second option of these cards. You discard the idea that you have the card and then you create a treasure token, and that to me is sort of the essence or the idea of that spell. And that is interesting because Galazeth goes about this really differently. But before we get to that, one person does this really differently as well. This is Ruta, because in her cards that are about treasure, we first see Start from Scratch. And this card shows us how she at first tried to make all sorts of ice sculptures, and she tried to follow the Dean of Perfection, but it didn't really work at all. So every time she would smash her art to pieces, she wouldn't get anywhere. So that's why Start from Scratch sets destroy an artifact. But then she had a breakthrough in the story as well, where she does create a treasure token. This is a moment where she learns how to create her art and she thinks about her biggest project yet. And before she starts to do it, she creates a small treasure token, which you see in this art, where she had been creating constantly, passionately, in hopes of impressing her greatest critic herself. And now finally she has an idea of how to do it, how to perform her own magma opus. And with this information we can really see how Galazeth is different, because Galazeth, usually when you create a treasure you have to sacrifice it to do what you want, and in these cases you have those treasures that will give you your mana for your 7 and 8 spells, for your big magma opuses that you can then do once, and then your magma opus is gone, your big project is gone, and you won't be able to do another big project for a little while. You will need to go back to the drawing table and you will need to think about how you will make your next piece of art. But Galazeth says, hey, I've created this school, and that is because I was created from creativity, I was created from change, I was created from conflict between perfection and expression, and I know how to do it perfectly every time. In Chaos I can every time do my magma opus, and every new project that I do is a great piece of art. That is what Galazeth says, and that is why he also doesn't bother anymore with this whole school. He isn't there anymore because he doesn't really care. All the art that they create isn't really inspiring to him a lot of times. But Galazeth says he ends the battlefield, creates a treasure token, and then artifacts you control can tap for mana without having to sacrifice them. But this doesn't only work for treasure, even though they really work well with him. This also works for other types of artifacts. So you don't have to give him those ideas and those concepts of art maybe, but he can use any type of artifact to create his art. He sees inspiration in, I guess, basically anything that has ever been created, and I think That's really cool as well, because flavorfully we can look at all the artifacts that we will put in our deck for in just a bit, and we can think about how Galazeth would use them to create his art. So that is a really cool thing to think about. One thing that I would like you to notice is the art from Raymond Swanland, in which we see, of course, the red and the blues of the fire and the ice, but they are also in these swirling motions of the Prismari. So I think that is a really nice touch here. So let's go through some cards that are really good with him. Of course, we want to create a lot of money, a lot of ideas, a lot of artifacts. So what we will want to do with things like Karn Living Legacy is a really good new card that hasn't spiked in price yet, as of yet, in October. But he can create Power Stone tokens, which are artifacts which can tap for mana usually, but when you use them with Galazeth, they can tap for any colored mana. So I think that is a little bit of an upside, but Karn really works well with our idea. So we will get to that later, but Spell Swindle, for example, creates those treasures, and then you won't have to sacrifice them, for example. And Inspiring Statuary is a way of making all your artifacts have improvised, so now they can help cast spells to tap for mana, basically for your non-artifact spells in this case, and that's a really good one as well. It's also just a 3 mana rock when you have Galazeth out. Then of course we want our own Magma Opus like cards, so X spells really lend well to that, but any high cost instant sorcery is really what we want here. So for example, Crackle with Power deals 5 times X damage to each up to X targets, and I would say this is only good from 8 mana, but that is exactly what we want to do with Prismari colors, and if you can make it just a little bit more with 11, you will do 15 damage to 3 targets, and maybe you can do that to all of your opponents, and that is a great piece of art in my opinion. Then Blue Zone Zenith lets us draw cards, which is good. And for example, Epic Experiment is a perfect flavor win as well, where you X out the top X cards of your library. You don't care what they are, but you will be inspired by all of them, and you may cast instants and sorcery spells for free as long as they are lower than your X cost. Then we want some other cards that really benefit from our spells. So for example, Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch, a newer card, is really good with him. At the beginning of your upkeep, you return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand, but you don't really care because you like all instants and sorceries as a art form. Of course, make sure that you have some beautiful instant and sorceries here. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, the Flame of Tzeentch also deals 1 damage to your opponent, which is just a little bit of nice icing on the cake. And then we have Birgi, God of Storytelling, which is also basically an art. Says whenever you cast a spell, add a red mana. We can use this very well. And also, creatures you control can boast twice, but we don't really look at that part ever. Then we have Mana Form Hellkite, which is a 4 mana flying dragon, which is also a 4/4, which is pretty big. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX red dragon illusion creature token with flying and haste, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast that spell, and we will create some big dragons with this. Exile that token at the beginning of your next end step, sure, but our dragon has haste and it's just made to attack anyways. But this is the thing, I have been playing with Galazeth a lot in a instant and sorceries focused deck in a 99, but he never really got the shine in there, and that is because he isn't really about those instants and sorceries and not about the big moment. He is about constantly creating the art. He doesn't care that you see it, basically. As long as you have those artifacts, he is fine with it. He knows that a lot of new ideas have been created. So what we will do is win with those artifacts. So how do we do that? Well, of course, in this color pairing, we also have Voodoo-Clad Telkor Engineer, and he is really cool because he gives your creature tokens haste. That doesn't really matter for our treasures, but at the beginning of combat on your turn, you create a 2/1 blue mirror artifact creature token, and then you may choose a token you control. If you do, each other token you control becomes a copy of that token. So at least you will be able to make your treasures into 2 ones. So that is one thing that you can do. But we can do better, because for example with Feldon of the Third Path, we can create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard. So we can copy any creature in our graveyard and then make all of our creatures into that copy. The one that we chose gains haste and we sacrifice it at the beginning of our end step, but that's okay, we got a lot of other versions of it now. Sublime Epiphany is another cool example. It is also just a big spell, so we like that anyways, but then we can choose all of these forms, 5 of them at most. We can counter a spell, counter target activated or triggered ability, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, so we now at least have one thing, but preferably 2 or 3 maybe if we are very lucky. Then you also get to draw a card, but then also you create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. So we can do copies of creatures we have on the battlefield right now as well. So that's another way to do this. And I want to finish with, if you know me, my favorite kind of card, which is redundant cards. You need those in your deck. You need things that do sort of the same thing for you. Now the front side of Storm the Vault doesn't really do the same thing. Not at all. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal damage to a player, create a treasure. We can deal damage because we have a lot of flying creatures in this deck. Then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 5 or more artifacts, which will be easy for us, you transform Storm the Vault. It turns into Vault of Ketlakan, which says swimming in coins proved harder than they'd hoped, but dancing was a jingling delight. So this is a perfect flavor win. They want to dance on the ideas, all of the ideas that we have created. That is why I'm mostly enthusiastic about this one. But you also have 2 choices, which is really insane in this deck. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, sure, but also this is the one that we want. We add blue mana to your mana pool for each artifact that we control. So it's basically doubling our effect that we get from Gallisath. And we are very happy with that when we can flip Vault of Ketlakan to have very, very, very big X spells. So that was it for this deck. Hope you like it, and let me know if you had some different ideas with Gallisath, or if you have played him, and if this format and timing maybe is exactly how you want it, because you got to the end, you get to say something about this type of video, I'd say. Have a nice day and bye.